David, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Professor Saleh. It's a pleasure to be here. I think I was here in 1994, and I've been in and out several times in a very different capacity. And to some extent, nothing seems to have changed much. I just commented about that sort of Mohammad, which in a way is refreshing. That means there's stability, there's continuity as well. So it's a pleasure to be back, and more so this time the opportunity to launch our new book, because yes, I edited this book, but I always like to use the collective our book, because Professor Saleh is a contributor to this book. Essentially dealing with a small audience, the question is, why would anyone want to read this book? Why would anyone want to spend money to buy this book? For me, it starts with the context. What generated this intellectual agenda? Why engage in this intellectual inquiry? I'm originally from the West African state of Sierra Leone. And Sierra Leone has been in the news for a very long time because of the devastating bloody civil war and the controversy around the Civil War peace settlement, but also the nature of international intervention to end the bloody civil war and to put together some semblance of some format of Civil War peace settlement. To the extent that Sierra Leone is now currently used as the most successful model of the international community, a case that the international community finally got right. The UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon in Sierra Leone said, he is pleased, in a very triumphant mode, he is pleased to acknowledge that Sierra Leone is a success story. Former British Prime Minister Tony Blair, in the same vein, said, Sierra Leone has undertaken a remarkable period of successful transformation from war to peace. And the UN Executive Secretary in Sierra Leone said, you have to invest in success, that is Sierra Leone. So with all these international advertisements and international promotion of Sierra Leone as a successful model of post-war peace building and state reconstruction, well, I started questioning the fact that, well, is this really true? Is this really true? Away from this PR gloss of presenting Sierra Leone as a successful model of international community's intervention. Bearing in mind that what the international community often presents as a successful model is only the half-truth. So I started engaging with a whole range of actors, policy practitioners, those who have been involved in the intervention itself, but also to ordinary Sierra Leoneans. And I rapidly realized that that is not essentially the whole truth. So we put together a body of academics, outstanding academics, to begin to engage with this question, the extent to which Sierra Leone has been a successful model. But then over and beyond the engagement with Sierra Leone, in terms of understanding the opportunities, challenges, and complexities of post-war peace building and state reconstruction, we wanted to also engage at a larger picture the liberal peace intervention strategies. Because to a very large extent, what we see across the board when people talk about Sierra Leone is that Sierra Leone has been a very good story, a success story of liberal peace intervention. And liberal peace intervention, to a very large extent, with the dawn of the new millennium, is responsible for decrease in bloody wars and armed conflict. So you see the narrative is building from so-called successful models to the dominant paradigm of ending wars in different parts of the world using the liberal peace agenda. And the liberal peace thesis is based essentially on four basic assumptions, and I'm sure you are familiar. That i.e. first assumption that failed and collapsed states like Sierra Leone, Afghanistan, etc. they pose a clear and present danger to international security. For example, Somalia and its threat to international maritime security and terrorism, etc. So that it is the responsibility of the international community to go in and reconstruct these failed states and put them back together. Because if not, these failed and collapsed states provide a breeding ground for marginalized groups to develop terrorist outfits, radicalized elements, and begin to attack the international community. The second premise is that that actually provides the justification that disorder exists in other parts of the world. Hence, it provides justification for liberal peace intervention, i.e. military intervention for state reconstruction. Based on that, therefore, the other justification, the premise is that when the intervention takes place, it's based on the introduction of, one, democratization, i.e. elections, periodic elections, marketization, open markets, economics, etc. But also public institution rebuilding, that if you reconstruct these failed and collapsed states, you have to make sure that you rebuild the public institutions so that the reach of the government can be expanded through the length and breadth of the country to maintain security and order and stability and legitimacy, so that the reconstructed state can then serve the dominant interest of the international system. So the fourth assumption is therefore that liberal peace building has become almost a kind of technical managerial approach. You just go into Libya, you just go into Syria, you just go into Iraq, Afghanistan, you do the usual military security, and then you put a few things together, and everybody will be hugging themselves, and that is the end of peace. But we all know that that doesn't happen. It doesn't happen that way. That peace building is not apolitical. It's heavily laden with political connotations, interests, etc., etc. So out of these basic assumptions, it has therefore created liberal peace building as the dominant paradigm on how to end wars and armed conflict in different parts of the world. In fact, any new conflict situation, and that is the argument I've advanced in this book, any new conflict situation in Libya, in Tunisia, in Egypt, in Syria, post-Assad regime, provides the unique opportunity for the expansion of liberal peace building without actually engaging with the fact that whether in fact liberal peace building actually does what it says it claims it will do, that is reconciling bitterly divided communities. That is the challenge. So based on this assumption, therefore, this book is to a very large extent, in terms of the core arguments in this book, this book is to a very large extent a critique of the liberal peace building thesis. It simply argues, and as Mohammad has said in his chapter, in chapter 9, the excessive focus on the liberal dimension negates the social dimension. And if you do that, how do you reconcile bitterly divided communities? So the argument in this book, on one hand, is a dominant critique of the liberal peace building agenda itself. And it uses the framework of Sierra Leone to illustrate that if Sierra Leone is used as a successful model, and the argument goes that Sierra Leone has seen the largest international peacekeeping intervention, that the international community has excessively invested in post-war peace building and reconstruction to the tune of $20 billion. That Sierra Leone, with the end of war, has organized 2 successive democratic elections and transition, and in fact is about to organize the 3rd in November. In other words, Sierra Leone seems to have all the benchmark of a very successful model. But the simple question for me is, if that is the case, how comes 70% of the population still live on less than $2 a day? How comes all the post-war state reconstruction and public institution building are not actually guaranteeing human security of ordinary Sierra Leoneans? How comes there still exists structural violence to the extent that it threatens the fragile peace in post-war Sierra Leone? These are fundamental questions that the liberal peace building agenda doesn't seem to engage with, because it's based on the usual short-term intervention, quick fix, exit strategy orientation. And Sierra Leone is very much part of that debate. So the core argument, again, as I've said, a critique of the liberal peace building intervention. But also, we have tried to engage with the nature, dynamics, and complexity of post-war peace building and reconstruction from an internal perspective, i.e. the case of Sierra Leone. Because we want to understand this very challenging intervention from a single case perspective that has resonance, not only for Sierra Leone, but beyond the borders of Sierra Leone, Africa and other parts of the world. In other words, what lessons can be learned from this project in Sierra Leone and apply it to the case of Afghanistan or Iraq, bearing in mind, obviously, no single country's experience is directly replicable because all conflict situations are different. So I am not saying that we have the magic wand that you can actually replicate the example, but we are arguing here that there are things that you can actually glean and learn from and begin, even in terms of the challenges. Often I know international intervention, they don't spend time on understanding what went wrong. It's often on what we got right. And we say, well, look, it's also part of the lessons learned. You have to look at what went wrong in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in Sierra Leone, and then use that as the basis to improve further intervention. So that is the other argument of the book. The third argument of this book is that we want to develop a comparative analysis of the extent to which Sierra Leone can be used as kind of mirror image for similar comparative examples of post-war peace building and state reconstruction in different parts of the world. And there are other examples from Liberia, from Somalia, from Sudan, etc., which we have tried to bring together. So this in itself is a very interesting book because it engages the intellectual agenda of liberal peace building. And it does a very critical analysis of the positive dimensions but also the negative dimensions. In terms of those who are interested in case study, you have a range of case study materials from Liberia to Sierra Leone to engage with this whole notion of liberal peace building and what happens when war ends, when the guns fall silent. How do you reconcile bitterly divided communities? So I've often used the phrase, beyond the guns and beyond the money. Beyond the guns meaning this security military dimensions, beyond the money, obviously beyond the socio-economic dimensions. How do you reconcile bitterly divided communities, especially when the international community have left? How do people begin to pick up their lives? We've seen an example of the Second World War. More than 60 years after the Second World War, people still live with the traumas of the war. More than 2 decades after the genocide in Rwanda, people still live with the traumas of war. So, when war ends, it's markedly on that research area of intellectual engagement. This is what we've discovered, that often people are not interested. They just expect people to go back to normal lives, and people don't go back to normal lives. Take the case of child soldiers. They just don't disappear in societies. They have to deal with the traumas of war, the labeling, what they have done during the war itself, but also trying to rebuild their traumatized and devastated lives. Women who have been raped in war and destroyed, families destroyed, they just cannot disappear. They have to rebuild their lives. This for me is a markedly under-researched area. And I think that Sierra Leone provides a very good example, especially for those of you who are emerging academics or already academics. I would encourage you to look at thematic areas around this issue. So let me just try to wrap up by looking at the contributors. The book itself is divided into 2 parts. The first 4 chapters look at the core issues around understanding the liberal peace thesis. What is it? How do we know it? What are the theoretical interpretations around peace building and state reconstruction? Famously, President George Bush, during the time of the Iraqi invasion in 2003, said, "We don't do peace building." But then he realized that you cannot actually win peace through the barrel of the gun. So they have been involved in post-war reconstruction in Iraq to the tune of $300 billion. One student, when I gave the figure of the involvement of US financial expenditure in the Iraqi war, simply said, "No wonder American government is broke because of all the wars." So the first 4 chapters actually look at the theoretical issues, with my own chapter, the introduction chapter, and I'm sure the name Roland Paris is familiar. Roland has written extensively on post-war peace building and international intervention. In fact, his book, At War's End, started this whole debate looking at 10 years of UN intervention around the liberal peace thesis of ending wars. But also we have colleagues who have looked at from Amsterdam University. I'm sure the name is also familiar, Wilhelmine Bekoren and Geert Jun. They've done the socio-economic dimensions of the war itself, of when war ends. Because often the focus, understandably, is on the security military dimensions of peace building and state reconstruction, understandably. But after the emergency phase, having signed the Civil War peace settlement, how do you reconcile bitterly divided communities? The socio-economic dimensions become really important. But then the remaining chapters now look at Sierra Leone and the comparative dimension. And this is where Mohammad, Professor Saleh's chapter, the comparative analysis of Liberia and Sierra Leone, is very interesting. Because it brings in this neglected notion of the social. In other words, in his usual critical, I don't like to call him liberal left perspective, but he likes turning things on his head. And he says, well, yes, we can focus on the political economic dimension, but what about the social dimension? That is at the heart of winning peace. And he looked at Sierra Leone and Liberia to say, look, and to some extent, Liberia is also very much used as the example of successful post-war peace building and state reconstruction. But what is missing in these two examples, and hopefully the mistake will not be made in that of Tunisia, Egypt, Libya, etc., that you have to put the social at the heart of post-war peace building and reconstruction. Ladies and gentlemen, I would want to formally take this opportunity to launch this book, but also the opportunity to share the views, and I would like to hear some of the views on some of the things I've said. Obviously, you don't have the opportunity to have read the book, so you don't, and I'm sure I can always say, go back to the book, which you haven't read. But fortunately, I think this is a unique opportunity to present this book. And in terms of endorsement, the former president of Sierra Leone, President Kaba, this is not a PR gloss, but I thought it's important to read it.
No, of course it is not.
Yes, President Kaba, who was very instrumental in ending the war and undertaking civil war peace settlement and post-war reconstruction, said of this book, in his endorsement, said, this book clearly delineates the successes and challenges of my country experience when I was at the helm of the things, while making the transition from war to peace building and development. It is essential reading for all Sierra Leonean policymakers, as well as others interested in post-war reconstruction, especially in Africa. So ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to, on behalf of the contributors and on behalf of ISS and Bradford University and my new responsibility leading the UNESCO African Peace University, to formally launch this book here in this prestigious institution of ISS. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Francis. I know that you are leaving, but you can stand up and get one or two comments before you. Anybody want to say anything? No? Anyone want to say? Because he has to catch his flight at 8:30, so
I can stay for another hour.
Okay. Okay. There you are. If you want to engage with him, please. If not, you want us to take the other two and then we have a discussion?
Yes.
That would be
good.
Mohammad and Pedro. Let me introduce you. Pedro is not here. But
Paolo, I don't know, I think he must have gone to New York because he was asking about time difference with New York.
Okay. Maybe you want to call
Meanwhile, maybe we could ask one or two questions.
Yes, what ask him?
Yes.
Yeah, I looked at the table of contents and I mean it's the kind of book that we like to use in teaching. And it's a particular chapter which is really recommend. But one of our problems in that is we can only ever use one chapter per book. So even if we really like the book, we're only allowed, because of copyright regulations and this kind of thing, to actually use one chapter. It's sometimes very difficult, you know. Introductions are obviously too general. What we'd be looking for is a chapter that's quite critical. And from the
I don't see him. I don't see him there.
I
think we start.
Okay. So I'm in the middle of asking a question. Is it okay?
Oh yeah.
And from the titles of the chapters, it's not easy to tell like which would be the most critical perspective. Would it be Carla? Would it be, you know, we want to, because we tend to take quite a critical perspective. And we would be looking. Would you have any suggestions or recommendations for a chapter that would be suitable?
well, this is a question again that students always ask at Bradford. Can you please recommend one chapter that's happening? I always say, you have to read the whole book. But the obvious question always is that I don't have the money to buy the whole book. Then your obvious retort is that you have to go to the library, the book is here. But to answer your question, it depends on what you are looking for. If you want to engage with students from a theoretical understanding of liberal peace thesis, then obviously I would strongly recommend you to look at the introduction chapter, which engages with all the debates around it. But more so, Roland Paris's Saving Liberal Peace. But the rejoinder to Roland Paris's book chapter has already been written by my colleagues Mandy Turner, Neil Cooper, and Mike Pugh. This is called I think the challenge of the last liberal peace builder. Actually, they are taking on Roland for some of his overtly positive construction of the liberal peace thesis. So if you are looking for theoretical understanding of the whole debate, then introductory chapter and Roland Paris's chapter. But if you are looking for case studies, there are a range that you can actually pick on, but always start with a single case study. Say, for example, Carla's chapter on Sierra Leone is very critical because it's a critique of the extent to which they've got it, but not as well. They haven't got it, they haven't quite well got it. But if you're looking for comparative case study, then I would suggest Mohammed's chapter because it looks at two very good examples of Liberia and Sierra Leone. Next door neighbors, but they have the tragic twins of being involved in bloody civil wars and the usual magic of post-war state reconstruction. So the question is, what is it that you want to share with your students? That will then determine the chapter you want to suggest to them.
Who else?
Okay, I think we...
Okay, yeah, thank you. I thank you very much. Now it is my pleasure to introduce Mohammad Pournik. Dr. Pournik is public practice leader at UNDP, Regional Center for Arab States in Cairo. He is also responsible for advising advisory service in economic and social policy. Advisor also on human development and the MDGs. And he's in the modern names of people, I think he is in the area of knowledge production and knowledge management within those areas. But also he has expertise in the political economy of development. Of course, working with UNDP, he must have done his project management and assessment of development results. Again, work with community-driven development, and he's a macroeconomist and also a finance economist. He has a very broad take on development issues, not only from a theoretical viewpoint, but also from practice where he was, in fact, he is there in the practice, producing knowledge, managing knowledge, and also creating the interface between policy and research. That's what he's now. Paolo Lembo, he's the officer in charge as the regional center and regional center director for Cairo, that is the United Nations Development Program. He joined the UN as an associate expert in the International Fund for Agricultural Development, that is IFAD, in Rome. He has been director of UNDP Iraq, president coordinator in UNDP Algeria. He worked in Kosovo in the same capacity, member of the advisory board of the United Nations Peace University and United Nations Staff College. But also he is an adjunct professor giving lectures in different places on peacekeeping and humanitarian affairs in Colombia, University of Rome, in Turin, Trieste, also in Discovery Nomade Superior. in visa, and also he's a laureate in literature and holds MA in modern drama from the University of Rome. And it is not at all surprising to find somebody who did modern drama is holding this position, because now in Japan, anybody who does medicine or engineering must do fine arts as well. That's super people and give them the possibility of being creative and open-minded and be able to deal with social issues in a completely different way. So between our two colleagues here, we are going to have a presentation of the new report, the current development in the Arab world. And I think this is very timely report, because after the Arab Spring, the tension between what is economic and what is political, and which one has been privileged, is both being privileged, or one is not, both of them are not. It is almost something similar to post-authoritarian regimes, but that was a post-conflict study, so you can see that which one fared better. I'd like to listen to your presentation and to launch the report.
Thank you very much. At the outset, let me first of all place on record my colleague, Mr. Mohammad, senior economist in the United Nations Development Program, and one of the main architects of the publication we are going to discuss with you, the Arab Development Challenges Report, and myself, appreciation for being invited here in this center. And let me tell you that we are delighted to share with you the time which was our disposal for this event today, which comes at the end of a very long tour that brought a group of people. We are the last survivor of this one. We were a larger group of people that authored this report. This is the last that we do. Therefore, yesterday we had a lunch hosted by the President of the European Parliament, Mr. Martin Schulz, for ourselves with 24 parliamentarians and Director General in the Commission and the Parliament to have an exchange of views on how we can best interpret the root causes of this transformative events that is reshaping political geography of this region and this economic landscape, and how we can really promote synergy between the United Nations system, the European Union, and bilateral organization, non-governmental organization, to support this democratic process. We have been around for a month in Europe in order to test the ground and to see how we can work a bit more closely together, and also in an attempt not only to present, to launch this report, but also to promote a common understanding of what we are talking about, because this understanding we feel is not there yet. We also have been around the Middle East, our primary constituencies, in order to discuss the report here. In the coming weeks we will round this exercise, which is lasting for the last few months. You have heard my name. I am the director of the Regional Center for Arab States, which is an office of the United Nations Development Program, which is based in Cairo in Egypt, and is responsible for oversight of the policies in the Arab region and the management of the program that are implemented out of 22 field offices that we have in 22 different countries. We have on the ground over 1,200 staff, national and international, in this part of the world. And our office is the one that tries to promote harmonization of program and consistencies of policies. This being one reason for which we have promoted the formulation of this report, to secure consistencies among various countries and the program within the various countries. I've been in the United Nations system for 26 years. I've mostly been managing field missions, and I've been working with many UN organizations and Department of Peacekeeping, Department of Political Affairs, UNWA in Palestine, also at the beginning of the First Intifada, IFAD, as you learned, the United Nations Secretariat, and then for the last 15 years the United Nations Global Program, and I've been head of missions, so there's coordinated in 5 distinct countries. So my experience is primarily in the field, in managing missions in complex emergencies, as we say, in United Nations. The day before yesterday, when I was in Brussels, a BBC journalist, who happens to be a friend of mine, also called me from Cairo, and he wanted to report on the latest event in Cairo. And he opened this telephone interview asking me, aren't you worried for the latest development in Cairo in Egypt? Aren't you anxious? Is that the end of this espoir, of this season of dreams or illusions? Then my answer is, why should I? I'm always surprised in acknowledging this sense of anxiety or surprise in the West for the dynamics of the Arab Springs. And I say this is largely because there's a great deal of misunderstanding or misperceptions on the nature of this phenomenon. So instead of answering with a quote, I answered with a quote from one of his compatriots, who happened to be Winston Churchill, when he said, well, in the end, you see, revolutions never give birth to well-behaved children. They always give birth to very naughty children. Then one can only hope to contribute to make sure that this child grows up properly and acquires a certain sense of responsibility. And then as time goes on, it behaves well and learns how to live with other people and contribute to the progress of civilization. And this could be the starting point of our meeting. Because we have to appreciate that what happened in the Middle East in the last few months is part of a phenomenon, an ongoing phenomenon, that will continue to be turbulent, will continue to be violent, will continue to be source of blood and tear and unsettlement for long to come. This is not abnormal, this is not exotic, this should not come as a surprise to anyone here. We should only rejoice that the political revolution in the Middle East now has taken into force in the last few years. This doesn't mean that because we have a few semi-democratic elections we are going to democracy in any of the places where they're going to have them. We have to appreciate that there is a physiological disconnect between the holding a specific election, no matter how semi-transparent we deem it to be, and the rooting of truly democratic culture. Those are two different dynamics. Elections are an important station in this journey. It is only the beginning, and this journey is going to continue to be extremely bad, extremely difficult, and extremely unsettling. We do not know what will be the end station of the journey. Doesn't mean we should be surprised, anxious, or worried about that. No. We should try to understand what is the nature of the immensely vast, volume, assortment of elements that are part of this equation, to understand how they will be combined to better anticipate what are going to be the next station of the journey. This has been the fundamental reason for which the center that I direct some time ago decided to promote the formulation of this report, the Arab Development Challenges report, to try to tap into Arab resources, because the report is entirely written by Arab scholars, sociologists, economists, politologists, governance experts, a leading member of non-governmental organization, former politicians here. We have only provided the intellectual framework for the exercise that has been entirely conducted by Arab national. I would like to stress this vehemently because it's an important element that we really care for as much as we could here. In an attempt to try together to read what are the root causes of this phenomenon, the visible is visible, and therefore understand how we can better accompany this long democratization process. The starting point of this study, and I will synthesize, and it's the essence of that, and then my colleague Mohammad, who is one of the architects exercise, and we go deeper into the specific nature of the content of the book, is a fundamental analysis of the nature of the development of the underdevelopment model that has characterized the history of the Middle East in the last half a century. The question which is a starting point of the exercise is why the Arab region still is much richer than it is developed. What has been the essence of the failure of this development mode that has driven the economy of this region where they have its country? And what are the root causes of the development model? And what can be done to reshape, reinvent this model and making sure that it contributes to the democratization process? And the analysis of the policies that are characterized this failed development model, the impact they had on the lives of the population, of the people in it, and how these policies have been a determining factor for the Arab Spring here, brought a very simple paradigm here, which is what we believe has defined Arab developmental models in various countries in the last half a century. This paradigm is based on an invisible contract which was written by the citizen state. This being a social contract for which the state assumed individual responsibility for the management of the various countries' resources, which in essence, in the majority of cases, were energy resources, oil and gas, would then distribute the revenues generated by these resources to the citizen in the form of very partially distributed and suboptimal in terms of quality services, water, electricity, sanitation, education, very minimal suboptimal. And in turn, would require from the people that they would give up their right to participate in the management of public affairs of the country, would participate to their right to contribute to the political life of the country. And in particular, they would renounce to waive right to expect accountability from the state on how the state would manage the resources it needs in order to secure a minimum level of survival to the nation, to the people that are part of it. This fundamental invisible contract, which is not written anyway, was enforced with scientific, methodical, paradigmatic efficiency by every single country in the region, in different, according to different subset of models, because the Emirates is not Yemen, and Morocco is not Kuwait, Saudi Arabia is not Jordan, where you do not have adequate level of energy resources to sustain the funding of the budget here, and you have system of patronage that will replicate the model. There are countries which I will not mention that do not have oil and gas, but they have significant checks that comes from other Arab countries that have oil and gas, and this check enables them to survive. And the management of this funding would be exercised exactly the same level of lack of accountability or opacity that would characterize the budget of this country that have this energy resources here. Which is a theory that brings a whole set of corollaries then, in terms of the state being individually responsible to really disseminate the riches of the budget in an extremely arbitrary manner, which primarily means the more you support a certain political administration, the more you receive financial assistance, irrespective of the need of your region, of your wilayah, of your municipality, of your area that you come here. So there was no sense of neither moral, political, social justice on how every country will manage its budget, with enormous consequences in terms of social justice, in terms of equality, in terms of people's participation or exclusion. Mohammad now will be very much more specific. and would also mean that people would not have any stake. There was a disconnect between the state and people here. And the state would consider itself authorized in not exercising accountability, because we'll tell the people, no, you don't contribute to this budget, because the tax system will not allow that. The budget of this country is entirely composed of revenues generated by natural sources, so people will not pay taxes. And not paying taxes will not have any stake. No citizen can go to the government and say, well, I want to know how you spend the budget here. Why you give this money to the south and this money to the north? Why you give this money to this area where there are certain people who support the regime, and this money to this area which is very minimal, and people who need the money to live in dire poverty only because they're not supporting the ministry as much as you would expect at the end. So there's a total arbitrary level of distribution of this budget. The second consequence that you have here is the definition consolidation, the emergence of an economic elite that to a different degree of existence in the other region was defined by the same paradigm of association with the political elite. So you are as economically influential as it will be made by your association with the political elite. So the emergence of economic elite in many parts of the Middle East is not determined by performance of the economic contribution of a group of power to the economy. No? An entrepreneur is as influential as much produces, while jobs contributed to the state budget, contribution to the advancement of economic progress. But that's not the case. You are as influential as you are close to the regime, which means that there is no incentive in contributing to the economy. That's not to define your level of power and your economic growth. If you are close to the regime, then you have certain access to certain economic assets, contract interests. If you are not, no matter how much you produce, you are not access. This brings again a whole set of realities that the book analyzes in a very specific manner. Some data you find are extremely significant and interesting. And one of the value of this book is looking at economic statistics from a very different angle. And in doing so, you discover a lot of very original realities, let's call them integrationist expression original reality. Namely that if you look at the economic performance of the majority of this government here, then you may believe, as we ourselves in the UN did mistakenly, that there is economic growth in the region here. But then if you look at the percentage of the financial input into the government budgets of Maghreb country, for example, that comes from manufacturing input, from the industrial input, how much from the industrial production, the manufacturing production comes into the state budget, then you see a process of gradual decrease on how much industry, manufacturing, and all of these sectors that produce employment have contributed to the state budget. To the point that now, in the Maghreb, this percentage is even lower than what you have in Sub-Saharan Africa. This is a remarkable element that is somewhat lost in this analysis here, which is you may have a GDP growth, but if it is accompanied by a process of deindustrialization mostly, and it is completely associated to a budget defined by energy resources, being the energy sector non-employment intensive, you don't get jobs. But then who cares? That was not a preoccupation in many of these regimes. So the report really in the end argues that our concern should not just be looking into specific economic reform initiatives here, but should really understand how to re-engineer the social contract and formulate a new pact between citizen and state based on two fundamental pillars. One of representation, which people need to have the right to expect accountability from the state, to expect their voice to be heard, and now the government is shaped, and now the budget is managed. And the state needs to exercise accountability on how to manage its resources. It needs to procure, and that the book is extremely strong, proper, adequate regulatory framework for the economic life to be given a chance to be expressed in a healthy manner. From the legal infrastructure to the fiscal infrastructure, for which people have to appreciate the need to contribute to the state budget. They need to instill this dimension that lending behavior as modern citizens. That budget is their budget. It's not the budget of the government, because they extract the oil is theirs. And then when they give money to people, that is charity. Therefore, people do not have the right to expect to ask the government how it has used the money that they generated through the management of the oil and gas. And a whole assortment of other responsibilities that we describe in a very systematic manner. I think it would be interesting for all of you that study this building, peacekeeping, the role of internationalization, governmental organization, world also, to reflect also to which kind of partnership should be forged in order to contribute to help the new administration in the Middle East to understand how to re-engineer the social contract, understand which kind of policy options are before them in order to do that, understand which kind of economic reform platform can be inspired by this new social contract, and which reform could be crafted in a manner that contributes to the pursuit or the protection, given what is happening in Egypt, of this new democratization process here. That is what we are trying to do with this book, which is very uncharacteristic for the United Nations, to not only try to define a general diagnostic analysis of the dynamics of what we call the Arab Spring, also to go much beyond that, to try to identify what are the possible policy options that the newly created administration in the Middle East had before them in order to tackle the gigantic challenges before them in terms of economic structure, just to survive, just to avoid the economic meltdown, which is what we before us in Egypt, for example. And in that, it was quite a struggle for us in the UN to do that. Why? Because the UN doesn't. We don't engage in promoting policy prescription. We try to pretend that we make the best possible effort to show you some element of what we hope we together will define as close to the concept of reality. Then it's up to the individual to make the best out of it. To say, well, maybe in Egypt we should need a little bit more social justice. No, we don't have that in the UN. We bring you the statistic, the data, the analysis. Anyone can decide if there is justice or not in a certain part of the world. This is wrong. That's not why we have the United Nations. That's not why we have the Charter of the UN. That's not why Dag Hammarskjöld decided to accept to be the Secretary General of the UN. Now, in this book, for the first time, we tried to adopt a different method and to say, well, this is the problem. That's the way we look at that from a different angle. And in our opinion, our means the Arab scholar that has written, those are the challenges that we have to tackle imminently and urgently. If we don't do that, we are heading toward economic meltdown and collapse. This can hamper the democratic process, because if you don't address the issue of social justice, which is an economic issue, not a political issue, there is no future for democratic reform in the Arab world. And those are the options that we see should be the basis for the public debate on how we restructure the tax system, how we rethink the phasing out of the food subsidies or the fuel subsidies here. This is the shock absorber we have to put in place to avoid the population would consider as untenable this reform. This is how the banking system should be restructured. So, in our opinion, this book also had to serve the not completely visible purpose to make us reflecting or what do we want our United Nations to be in the 21st century, how we can make it a bit less meaningless. assistance, because we run the risk if you are not given warning. I hope that you don't use this state Mohammad for any public kind of thing. Because there's still a few years before going to pension in the UN.
We cut that button.
Okay. Anyway, so how to make the organization as a real forum to discuss a real problem in which we have to take position, even when you are controversial. We have to stimulate the new administration and bring them toward the moral responsibility when they campaign to seize power or to support the electorate to talk about business. This has not happened in Egypt. When people were campaigning, rarely you had anything concrete on how the candidate for the election of president in Egypt wanted to restructure the budget, redefine the fiscal system, reinvent the banking system. Now, on this very simple topic, the future of 85 million people in Egypt is going to be decided. And not a single word was defined by any in the campaign. That is one. Number two, in the experience of myself, the new administration, there is really a lot of assistance. Because one thing is to run a charity network that brings health assistance in the outskirts of Cairo, informally. You can do this very well. And certainly the new political forces that empower them, fantastic job. Now they are now realizing, we know that because we've been discussing with them, that running an 85 million country on the verge of melting down, it's a slightly different business. They realize that. And my feeling is that they want to engage with us. Contrary to the people in Europe, in the European Parliament, we found the Parliament terrorized by this new political establishment. So, do we share the same human rights thing with all the women? What do we share? This is a new administration, they're different value, of course. We have to accept that we are going to deal with the whole assortment of hybrid government. So build it. I mean, we have to accompany that, we have to engage. Who are we to decide what is right now? They want to engage, although they don't want to give visibility to this engagement because they have a lot of suspiciousness toward Europe for very good reason, a lot of misgiving for even better reason here, a lot of anxiety because they have experienced since the beginning of the century which has not been terribly reassuring. We have to appreciate that if we are honest. They have all the right to be anxious, and Europe as well. There's a lot of ambivalence to it. They, not because they don't have money to do them, this is pretty good pretext. Move Europe when it needs always finds money to use for this counterpart. They simply do not know where all this has been going, which kind of administration they will have. And if this new administration will serve the economic interests of Europe or not. It's a very simple thing. So we have to help bringing engagement, if not consensus, in this conflict. And accept you're going to deal with a lot of hybrid partners that may not give open visibility to the aspiration to engage, but my experience, they want to engage, and they need a lot of experience. Because economic governance is not something that you invent only because you won elections. In our dealing with a lot of these people in the administration, they have a lot of need of assistance. And I am optimistic because I feel that what is happening is positive. It doesn't correspond to my dreams, of course. I would like things to go in a different manner. And there is a process. There are a lot of good people out there that are dedicated to commendable political concern. Yeah? Perhaps if we overcome our gracious European prejudices, to engage with them with an open mind and genuine heart, there's a lot more that we can do in order to make sure that all these inspirations generated in the last few months can blossom in some form of plausible democratic processes that will bring a little bit more justice in that part of the world. Now, the book goes very much in detail to a number of technical elements that we don't share unless people have written books, because it's a complex architectural proposal, policy recommendation, of analysis here. But I think it's one of the rare attempts to the UN to be frank, to be open, and to be prescriptive here. I do not know what is our future, Mohammad, and especially generally, we was the architect, I was a bureaucrat who signed all the books, so my role was very big. But I was very proud that there was a minimal and external part of this exercise. In going around in Europe, we had a lot of support. We had a phenomenal meeting in Chatham House, and we had people who were packing the room, could not get in. We were very interesting debate, but we had a lot of support from a lot of members of the academia that we respect here. We have a lot of enemies in many parts of the world, yeah? But I have always been suspicious of those that are only friends, especially if they carry a passport to the United Nations, and think that there's something wrong with what we do here. But it would be good if we reflect what is our role, the role of Europe, the role of multilateral institutions such as the United Nations, the EBRD, the World Bank, the IMF, the role of the non-governmental society, and the role of academia, institutions like this that are in between, in probing public opinion, in helping people to go over this prejudice, this provincial entrenched interest, whether an administration is good or not. It's good, it serves our purpose. If it doesn't, then it's no good. Why do an election? Well, is elected, is elected by the people. You elect or not, you have to deal with it. Election transparent, you go to deal with it. Otherwise, I didn't see why a lot of people who started to vote in their vote have dealt to someone like that was voting. But we didn't just need them. It got to be reciprocal, we will be patient. Nobody questions each other. Now, when you own 80% of the airwaves in the country, you present yourself as a candidate, as Prime Minister, you own the whole television system in the country. I mean, that is not the most democratic example Europe has given. Nobody at that time in there was a question that. So why should we question who could be elected in Egypt if it's democratic or not? As long as the election are democratic, and they may not even be perfectly democratic now, but it's the beginning of the process. Why not, basically? Let me give the floor to Mohammad Pournik, who has been around for some 3 decades on these issues and knows much more than me on the intellectual architecture that has generated this book. But I'd like you to reflect on the future that spring, on your role, since you are dealing with this thing, whether you study or you teach basically, and the kind of United Nations you have the responsibility to contribute to the fight in order to make sure that we serve the Charter of the UN and not the interests of the country that try to manipulate it for their own procuring economic interest. Well,
thank you very much. Paolo's taken a lot of the wind out of my sails. Let me go into some of the aspects of the publication which may be more of interest to an academic setting, the kind of challenges that we face. This report started out as a fairly economistic report with lots of data and a lot of work was done, and there are a whole load of background papers which have been put on the website. And I'm sure actually many academic institutions would find the background papers very interesting. We ended up not making much use of background papers because the events of December 2010 and January 2011 gave us an opportunity to say what we wanted to say for many years and could not say because, again, we are an organization that is controlled by our member states, so we run the risk of annoying our member states. I have to acknowledge that as a Tunisian commentator on the report once said, we owe a lot to the blood of martyrs whose blood nurtured this change that we're able to speak so freely. The fact that Tunisia has got Philippe Ben Ali allows us to speak very freely of what was happening there. By implication, other countries can understand the extent to which it applies to them, but we are not mentioning those other countries, and therefore they can claim that it was only in Tunisia that these things were happening. And the beauty of it is that it was happening in Tunisia because when you read the report, when you look at the kind of things that economists look at, Tunisia did well. Tunisia was the star performer in the Arab region. I remember On the 24th of June, we had to hurriedly come up with something new to put on the UNDP Tunisia website, because it talked about the Tunisian miracle. And so we had to find ways of tackling that thing. But the fact that the best performing fell apart shows that there was something fundamentally wrong. And in order to understand that, we had to adopt an eclectic, multidisciplinary approach and also look at things in a historical perspective. Unfortunately, one of the tragedies of modern social sciences is that it's become highly ahistorical. So you look at something as if there was no yesterday and there's no tomorrow. But the present day is very much determined by what happened in the past. And we also have taken huge liberties in terms of making generalizations, while agreeing that the specific areas of intervention might be different from country to other, but we try to focus on common characteristics. And to also openly analyze the processes of what we call exclusionary development, meaning a development process that, using our own lingo, rather than expanding people's choices and freedoms, actually has reduced those over time. So it has been accompanied by serious exclusion. It has actually deprived people of a lot of their rights. It has given them certain material benefits, but in exchange for taking a lot of their freedoms from them. And the processes of exclusion, again, it's very difficult for you to find the nice kind of data sets that we like to explain it. So we had to, again, make use of imaginative ways of explaining the processes by looking at case studies. And the report, as well, for practical reasons, and because it's, even though we don't say so openly, the report is very much focused on supporting the democratic transition. And the democratic transition, we do not see it having any chance in the higher income countries for the time being. Therefore, we focused it on middle income countries and LDCs, thereby allowing us to focus and also not getting unnecessary flack from potential source of support. Because, for example, we very much adopt a normative approach based on UN core principles. And if we want to apply that, then we would have had to discuss the issue of migrant labor, for example, in the richer countries, which is a very sensitive issue, and the discussion of which would have reduced our ability to support the transformation process. So that was a conscious choice that we made. But we didn't. But we just said that we're not dealing with it. We did not say that everything is fine in that process. So at least it's. I think we are intellectually honest and not made untrue statements. Now, the processes of exclusion essentially have been at work because neither the state nor the market perform their normal functions in these countries. And if you look at in terms of a tripod with your three main actors, the citizen, the state, and the market, you find that the state is not performing the normal functions of a state in terms of providing quality services, making sure that there is a regulatory framework that operates, making sure that there is reasonable infrastructure that reaches out to the hinterland of the country. And you find markets are not open. I mean, the whole discussion of liberal reform, we believe, is highly misplaced, because I would challenge if anybody can show me a functioning market, in the sense that we normally understand it by firms being free to enter and exit. No, I mean, it's only those who are politically well connected who get all the contracts. Everybody else remains at the level of a small enterprise. So this has to change. Now, how does this have to change? It has to change by you acting, because since the state and the market are engaged in this mutually reinforcing process at the expense of the citizen, for you to free the citizen, you need to work on both. And therefore, excessive focus on just the political front will not get you there. If you only have free and fair elections, but you don't open up your market, the fact that the market will continue to be controlled by 3 or 4 businesses will corrupt your political process and will not allow you to have democracy. So you absolutely have to work on both fronts. And you need to get at the level of the state, you need to get a capable and accountable state that performs the normal functions of a state. Not a state that is only capable to defend the interests of the ruling elite and is accountable to no one but the head of state and the people around the state. And also redefine the market. Open the market, make sure that people have access. I mean, anybody who wants to engage in economic activities has access to finance, has access to government contracts, what have you, because that's the only way you get a mutually reinforcing process involved. And this is the only way you can respond to the demand for dignity and social justice, which was so much prevalent in that spring. What people wanted was the ability to get jobs without the need to find some intermediary. So it wasn't just that they wanted jobs. Yes, they wanted jobs, but they also wanted the jobs that they needed. So it's not enough for you, again, to only work on the economic front. And then you have to work on both. But the good thing about it is that when you look at the figures, when you look at the level of ability for you to engage in alternative policies, the Arab region is quite fortunate in having a lot of what, for the want of a better term, before fiscal space. Because except for Egypt and Lebanon, Arab countries do not have a huge amount of accumulated debt, which would stop them from engaging in deficit financing if that is the only way they can expand the provision of infrastructure. And even in these countries, I mean, in Egypt, we know why they have a problem in terms of accumulated deficit. It's because of the politically motivated fuel subsidies, which have to be similar. So the ability to respond to the demands for social justice exists, and the demand exists. And unless you respond to it, there is a huge risk of the return of counter-revolution. So why it's urgent that something be done, and this has been one message that we've been conveying to most of our counterparts that we met, that right now is not the moment for us to ask people in the Arab region to put the demands for social justice in the back burner. It will not work. It is true that the experience of other countries that went through democratic transition has been that the social justice agenda was put on the back burner. It was definitely the case in Latin America. In the case of Eastern Europe, social justice even got substantially worse with the increasing concentration. I mean, one notable example being what happened in Russia with the rise of oligarchs. But that kind of an outcome is simply untenable in the Arab context because of the strength of the demand for social justice as a component of the movement. And that's also why you have the rise of the Islamist parties, because they're seen by many people as having responded in a very practical way to demands for social justice in terms of the programs that they're working on the ground. Now, one key issue that we have, both on the political front and the economic front, is the need to marry the long term and the short term. Now, for example, you absolutely need to have some form of a transitional justice process, because without leaving, you can't just ask people to forget about the past. There has to be some system, but that cannot be at the expense of reforming the entire judicial structure to make sure that people are assured of rule of law, because one reason why we have very low rates of investment is because there is no rule of law. So you cannot do your traditional transitional justice at the expense of the long term. So it has to be a step on the road to long-term reform of the justice system. The same way, on the economic front, you absolutely need to create jobs today. But the creation of those jobs today cannot be in a way that is completely unsustainable. And unfortunately, we see quite a lot of that kind of thing being on the grounds, with people pushing for the state to just take on additional staff. That cannot be sustained. The state cannot sustain those jobs. So what we're suggesting is, yes, you do have to create jobs, but you create those jobs by having very well-focused public works programs that deal with infrastructure bottlenecks and do not create long-term positions within the state. And we're not suggesting that. And this is the key area where I think the major feature of this report is that it's very pragmatic and it's non-ideological. We're not suggesting that the state has to do everything. The state has to undertake certain emergency activities in order to stabilize the situation. But you can do that in the process, you can set the tone for longer. And that's really the key, some of the key features that we want to see. We are also concerned by sending the wrong messages and having a very wrong understanding of what it means to establish stability. The stability that has been ruling in the region between the states has come from Bradford. And unfortunately, foreign capital has voted against a new kind of stability, but just walking out meant that stability disappeared with a huge decline in private investment. And we're making the case in our interactions that private capital as well is sending the wrong signal. Of course, we need to work with the new emerging governments to make sure that they do not frighten off foreign investors, but also foreign investors have to understand that there is a new game in town and they cannot expect to establish their businesses simply by virtue of knowing the Mubarak, which is the way they were doing the business in Egypt. And also that we need a new kind of foreign investment. When you look at the structure of foreign investment, you find that 20% of the foreign investment creates more than 60% of the jobs. it's that 20% that we're interested in expanding. We're not interested in the kind of foreign investment that comes there just to make a quick buck and creates very few jobs, which unfortunately has been the bottom for investment. But that's what you get when investment takes place in a context of political setup, which is completely independent. So those are some of the main recommendations, and we also see huge potential for green economy interventions, because the region has potential for producing alternative energy, and the industrial structure exists for them to also produce a lot of the material that would be used and would be used. And we also arguing very strongly for Arab economic integration. Unfortunately, up to now, there has been too much focus on political integration, and that hasn't really gone very far. But there are so many areas where the countries are complementary that integration, Arab economic integration makes some sense. One particular area is on food security, where regional food security is attainable, but national level food security is environmentally unsustainable and exceedingly costly and just does not make sense.
Thank you very much indeed, Mohammad. Any comments? They made straightforward proposal. You academics, how can you engage in this kind of transition that is taking place?
Thank you very much. I really appreciate that the presentations. Take any more time to think about the questions you think about. I can't contribute on those right away, but I really appreciate the way you were frank about the quite political, critical past in Europe and other countries towards the region. I just have a question with regard to your analysis of the causes of the Arab Spring, which I very much agree with. But of course, there's still the question that people might ask is why now? And why these dynamics have been going on for 40, 50 years in many of these countries. So I'd like to know, why do you think, the Arab Spring happened now, not 10 years ago, and not in 10 years? Is it because the system of patronage broke down because the resources were drying up somehow? Was it because privatization in those countries that didn't have oil, also notably Tunisia, was maybe going to that extent that there was nothing more to privatize, and all the tools, of the family had been sort of distributed to the economic elites, if you like, and so when that stopped, also the trickle-down effect stopped, and so the people on the streets, realized that now was the time to demand a voice and their rights. And was that, what was the trigger? That was my question. What triggered now, not before, not later?
If not now, when?
Okay, we may be allowed to say 1 minute.
Yes.
Take another question. Any more questions? Any other questions? Because they said they can take 1 or 2 before they. No, I think Helen is looking at.
No, I just kept thinking, whenever you were describing systems, I kept thinking of Europe. I couldn't help thinking we've got the Arabization of Europe, the Africanization of North Africa, and we don't know what's happening in the African context here. But it just sounds, all models that you present about being well connected and about the slim pickings from the state and so on are increasingly relevant north of the Mediterranean. I just can't help feeling that may be why you've got this hostile response in the European context, is that people are feeling very defensive about a European model, which is actually in crisis itself. So I can't help feeling that doesn't reflect their interests in the Middle East. It reflects more their domestic preoccupations and neurosis than anything else at the moment.
lot of things to reflect on. Elaine? No?
It's difficult here to think that one individual cause as a trigger of this historic event. At least I cannot think of it. It's difficult to think of a cluster of causes that also appears quite visible that may have contributed to the development. And you indicated some of them. For example, yes, the well-maneuvered privatization process that occurred in certain countries, we can mention Tunisia, has evidently deepened the divide in the region. Far from having attained the goals that they wanted as officially to believe in developing capital, modernizing the economy, giving more wealth to people, promoting employment for the poor, with local artificial food. The reality is they were only supported by certain administration beliefs in order to they understood they would have had an opportunity to gain wealth themselves. So of course that was not unnoticed on the population. So you had certain regions in Tunisia where the level of corruption skyrocketed. It became more arrogant, more blatant, more visible, more offensive. So is that the only factor? Certainly not, but it's one of the factors. Divide the region poor, the level of corruption became difficult to tolerate, expanded the outreach on the smallest level, the level of contract here, that definitely triggered phenomenon of dispute, confrontation, if not more simplistically say humiliation with a business. You don't use that kind of terminology, no? That triggered some disputes that then fueled the phenomenon. But the reality is that if we ask ourselves why we were all so totally unprepared, not only the EU but the CIA, these people have $105 billion budget a year. How do they spend money if they have no clue what is happening? We don't know that when riots started in the streets in Tunisia, so the White House frantically started to contact the US ambassador in Tunisia and said, what is happening here? And the feedback was there are some thugs in the street, calling certain underscore order here, things. And then 24 hours later, the White House looked, it doesn't look right. This is a new phenomenon. No, better take care of this some kind of disturbances in this district, I mean, these hooligans, whatever. Right? 48 hours later, the United States Saudi Arabia. And Obama himself called Valentine and said, how do you spend this money? $110 billion, apart from this drone attack, I mean, that is how the hell do you spend this money? There must be a way, I mean, not even then. Now, was it possible in reality to anticipate? Actually not, you can't. Because history you cannot really, you cannot anticipate here. Why? Because in this particular case, we all knew that was unsustainable. I remember after the last election, there was a big conference, 6 months before the riots in Tunisia, a big conference on security that they were the best mind in the world discussing. We all knew that it's not sustainable. We all told each other, well, it's not sustainable. Something like Malvin saying this last time century. So there was nothing new. It's interesting why we collectively, the whole of the world, should reflect why we missed it completely. Tunisia was totally unexpected. And why it was happening, and we had the nations. Our people they said, no, this is okay, I mean, everything's in control, Libya the same. So because really you cannot, because at the end the course of events is determined by the combination of an extremely vast assortment of diverse elements that are in this political space. But suddenly, for reason of political chemistry, combine themselves in a certain manner and they create a trigger, an historical process here. Now, what we should ask ourselves is the inability of learning from history You look at the Iraq experience and all the mistakes you can say. They say, oh, it's exactly the same story. It's an appreciation that democracy is a product, not this functionalist approach. Democracy is a product, so you just apply a certain methodology development, you go there, you wipe off the dictator, you apply the system, and then you're the most. As you say, 10 years later in Iraq, we're back to square one. Every 2 days with a bomb that kills 40, 50 people. So, why in Europe, in other part of the world, we have not understood that it would have been our interest if we would have adopted a wiser approach in evolving the system, not in bringing democracy, but in limiting the perverse social consequence of this unlimited corruption, injustice, and unsustainable level. We didn't move an inch. Why? And this is the single most important thing, because we still thought there was political opportunity to pursue support to authoritarian regimes that continue to perversely offend and humiliate and vexate these people, because we thought it was easier to make business. And this is a stupid idea. Let no more moral, political things here. It just can be stupid thing here. And that's why I was very happy this lunch to Parliament. I say that they are terrorized. Because now they cannot do business with gracious leader Mubarak, they are gone. And they have no clue how they're going to handle the new administration. Also, they do not know who they are. They don't understand how to read them. And they are terrorized, but they think that, as Mohammad said, stability is a matter of law and order, of gun and police, basically. Now they start reflecting maybe social stability, a real development can offer them better opportunity to protect their own economic interests. And that is what we want to use as methodology. We don't talk about moral graciousness, a just world, we have to bring justice to the Middle East. The UN wants to promote justice, we don't do that because it doesn't work. Now, just to tell you, look, if you want to continue Italian, you want to put your spaghetti in your kitchen in Rome, you've got to make sure that the gas comes from Libya, as simple as that. Otherwise, no spaghetti alone. So you have to understand that some kind of engagement you need to have them. Don't judge the Sharia, the concept. You have to take a seat and discuss them. As long as there is an open attitude to discussing the electrical, whatever it is. And my perception is that the new attitude is an energy course. Of not more tolerance, or not disputed much, but more pragmatic attitude in dealing with this administration, with a less judgmental and more legal. Yes, there's a lot of sense of guilt from the European administration and anxiety they project themselves in all this less than democratic leaders that are no longer in office. Also because they were in battle with them, last century, of course, they were in battle. So they identify themselves and they say they are no longer there, so they are terrorized, and this may have an impact. That's why you see the French, the British, Italian dashing to fly to Tripoli to meet in the administration and try to understand how to restore their political relations. But I feel that we're entering an era where the dynamics of this partnership is evolving. In which direction I do not know, but they start realizing that they are forced to change attitude. They are forced to be people that they may not share certain value with, but they are elected here. So they have to find a way to give it. And that's a very positive thing. Now, our role is to provide technical infrastructure for this to be transformed into agreement and into instrument of support, giving knowledge to this government, that available knowledge in order to run public affairs under very difficult economic circumstances.
And the things, and I mean, the timing question is a different question, but one clear message that, and also timing is not something which, even if we know why it happened, it doesn't necessarily apply to the future. But one clear message I think we are conveying is that development failures lead to political and social upheaval. And preventive development, I think one key underlying message is the importance of preventive development. And that's what's in it in terms of what we're proposing for the European partners, is that if you want stability on your shore, on your southern shores, there has to be preventive development. And let me refer to a different case that I'm sure Mohammad is also very familiar with. What happened in Darfur? I happened to be in Sudan when Darfur blew up. And Darfur is something we should have seen. That is completely different from this bigger thing, because the Darfur thing was happening for 10, 20 years. There were changes in time of when herders were moving because of changes in weather patterns. It didn't happen overnight, but we didn't see it happening. And it happened before our eyes. A symbiotic relationship, a traditional symbiotic relationship between farmers and herders was transformed into an antagonistic relationship. While this was happening, we were all asleep. When it happened, we started playing political games, some people supporting this side, some supporting the other side, and forgetting that in a way we were all guilty of what was happening. Because neither the government of Sudan nor the development partners really took those underlying changes which were happening before our eyes seriously. And what we're saying is that if we want to avoid that, we have to be open, we have to see these changes, and we have to work together across in order to deal with them so that you can have a sustainable situation. And we believe that this can happen in a mutually beneficial way. I mean, it's not a zero-sum game where someone has to lose. It can be beneficial to both parties. That's really the key, and I think we need to work together to come up with practical and pragmatic things that can be done in order to create a situation where there can be shared prosperity. And particularly in terms of a message for a European audience, why Europe accounts for over 60% of exports for the North African countries. The imports from North Africa are a drop for the European Union. So even if Europe allows those exports to double, okay, it will not have a major impact on the balance of payments for Europe, but it would mean the difference between day and night for those countries. Because it will just imagine the number of jobs that could be created if exports from those countries to Europe can be doubled. And that's our message. So those are the kind of things that Europe should find a way of supporting, because the other side is that, okay, if all these people are going to be without jobs, and now there's no longer a police state that was stopping them from getting to the coast and getting on a boat, fine. What are you going to do? You're going to put up 5-meter tall walls all around Europe? That's not feasible. So it's in the interest of Europe to do something, and those people are also positively inclined to a partnership. So it can be mutually beneficial arrangement.
Thank you very much for this MDGs for launching this report. It's a very important report. I think that it has a lot of new and innovative features. We know how the reports look like, and I think from what you already shared with us now, we are looking forward to reading it. We would like to post it in an electronic form on our website so that everybody here who is interested in this subject will get involved. And we will make a small area for comments. So you can also receive those comments directly. Now, hadn't you said that we should not put it in the public domain? This video would have been already this evening in our website. Our website is coded because we have passwords. Only people in this institute.
No, it can be put, yes.
No, no.
If
No
it is
problem.
good, yeah, no problem. It's
No.
not released, yes. No,
Okay. And you would like to have a copy of it? So we don't put it in YouTube.
Not yet. Wait till you go back to I think it would be best.
But it's a very small part there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I was so joking, absolutely.
Good. Okay.
Yes.
So we can.
Yes.
Okay.
Very much, yes.
You have permission
Yes,
to
absolutely.
put it in our website and also